Story 1. Dead boats. I worked a shrimp boat called the Melissa on the Gulf. Hot, sweaty work, but all the shrimp you can eat, so there's that. Captain Mike was my boss, a wizened old salt, rough around the edges, but a good man and a good boss. I worked with him out on the open waters for years before we split. Here's what happened. So one day we were out early and in an attempt to beat the other boats and get a good haul. I start cranking up the nets, position them over the collecting bin, and let them go whole shit ton of shree. MP this morning. Today is going to be a good and profitable trip at this rate. I look up at the nets and I see something caught up in it. Probably driftwood. But I gotta get it down or it. Lines rip the nets. I drop them down so I can pull it off. It's definitely not driftwood. I don't know what it is. It looks like a small arm. Like a child's arm, but it's not. It has a mottled green with brown flecks, but the texture almost seems like shark-skinned, thin, long fingers, almost 5 inches long. I almost can't call them fingers. They're webbed to one another with a thin layer of skin, almost translucent in the sun. I've never seen anything like it. Short pointed claws where fingernails would be in a person. I look down to the end of the arm, and I see it's been twisted and broken, caught in the nets at the end. It looks like it was sawed or gnawed off in a hurry by something dull. Dark red blood drips off it, pooling on the deck. I must have been in a trance staring at the odd thing, because the next thing I remember is Captain Mike screaming at me, "Get that fucking thing off the boat right now!" I snap and quickly work it avar. He, tossing it in the water as fast as I can. Some of the blood stains my hands and my shirt, but I rinse it off. Not the first time something's bled on me out here. As I clean up, I realize that Mick, he has turned the boat around. We're heading back to port. It's not even 10, and he's calling it a day. I have bills to pay, and maybe 100 pounds of shrimp ain't gonna cut it. I'm about to have a few words with the captain, but one look at him, and I see something is clearly off. He keeps glancing at the sides of the boat as he speeds up. While I'm tidying up, I see him pull out the emerging flare again and check it, pulling out the extra flares too. I guess this isn't the time to bother him. We get back, and as I finish up, Mike comes over to me and palms me for $100. Hell of a OT more than I'd make normally. As I take the money, his hand grabs mine tightly, and he pulls me in. Today's a short day. The extra is for you to keep quiet about why we had a short day. All right, see you tomorrow. He lets my hand go and starts looking too. The water, he seems lost, uneasy. This is a man who spent his whole damn life on a boat. I feel uncomfortable just seeing how uncertain he is. Yeah, I guess. Go out and have a few drinks. I know I will. Odd morning. But with pay like this, I hope I find one of those arm things every damn day. That evening I find Miss Elf at the local bar, closest one to the waterfront, where all the working stiffs congregate. We've been buying rounds for a few hours, bullshitting around about work and sex and general nothings. I've got a pretty good load on, and my curiosity gets the better of me. I ask in a low tone, "So what's the strangest thing you've ever brought up in the nets?" And don't fucking say tires. I mean, a whole car would be weird, but a tire's like all the time. I get a couple of answers. Well, once found one of those inflatable sex dolls. Rick found a box with a whole set of Encyclopedia Britannicas. John found not one individual but a pair of boots. Not that that's odd. What was odd is that they were his exact size. Hell, he was even wearing them. I push a little further. Why, but you ever see anything like a natural, like you couldn't explain it? I get a chorus of nods, but Kirk suddenly gets real quiet and starts staring intently at the sweat beating of his glass. I think I got all I can now, information-wise. Now for a couple more beers. I'm flushed today. My alarm goes off dutifully at 7:30 the next morning, and I dutifully go off at my ailer. Am in a swarm of profanity. My head feels like it's going to explode. I wish it would. I dutifully crack open a club soda, swallow some ibuprofen, and turn up a hot shower. By 8 o'clock I'm recovering, and on my way to the docks I wander up to the Melissa, Captain Mike's boat. He's muttering something under his breath, staring at the deck. The deck's been all scratched to hell, deep long, rakes intently scratching all over the place, most of them seeming to congregate where the nets release, where the blood spilled yesterday. I stand behind Mike for a couple of minutes until he acknowledges me. Not going out today. Not like this. Sorry. All right. But I gotta work, you know. I'm gonna ask around and see if anyone else is short a deckhand. Do what you gotta do. See you tomorrow. Yeah, sure. I luck out and find another boat short a man. I like Mike. Worked with him for years, but I work for paper, not a man. If he doesn't get his shit together, I'll have to find another ship. We have an uneventful day out on the other ship. I'm at the docks again, 8 a.m. sharp. Captain's got a whole load of bleach and cleaners. I wonder what's up. I'll pee. Hey, you double, if you help me lay the scrapes off. Bleach down the whole thing and we finish the deck. These scrapes and stains are bad for the boat. Shit, that's a lot of work. But double pay is double pay. Mike might be losing it, but I won't stop him from paying that much. I agree, it's a long day, much harder than our usual trips out. Still, profitable. Before I leave, Mike asks me to help him pull down the nets. That request stands out to me as they're a bitch to move, heavy and unwieldy. You usually only do it if you've got a rip or something, but these are perfectly good. As I leave, I see Mike Pye let them up on the beach, pour some diesel on top, and light them up. Doesn't make any sense, burning good nets like that. And why burning? After working my hands and back that hard, I need a beer. I head out to the bar. I spot Kirk at the bar and fall in next to him. We talk a bit, starting with the weather. For other people that may sound like tepid conversation, but out on the water I tease vital information. Eventually, I get enough in me, and we start talking about our boats, bitching about the bosses. It starts off as a good-natured pressure release, but when I start bitching about all the extra work I had to do today with the deck and the nets, Kirk cuts me off abruptly. He's not crazy. You need to find another boat. Maybe somewhere a little further up the coast. That's all I get out of him. He's like a stone wall after that. I'd assumed Mike had spent a few too many years under the sun, baking his brains. But Kirk is usually pretty good with advice. Still, the next morning, I head in to talk to Mike. We finish restoring the decks. Now he's on talking about possible residue on the sides of the propellers. Says he wants to scrape those down next. This is crazy. It's way beyond a two-man job. You need to dry dock a boat for all he wants. It's the start of the season, and I know he doesn't have enough cash lying around for that. I spend the day trying to pressure wash the sides of the boat as a cheaper fix. The end of the day, Mike slips me a few $100 and looks me right in the eye. I don't want to go out there, not with the ship like this. It's not ready. All right, but if there's no work for me, I need to look elsewhere. I understand. It's been good. He gives me a firm handshake and looks me right in the eye. Something is welling behind those eyes, but he fights it back. He turns to organize up the ropes. I notice that he's got a heavy revolver clipped to his side. It's not unusual for a boat to have a gun on board. Put a hand cannon on your person. I'm starting to really worry about Mike. This is not normal behavior. I'm not sure if I can talk about this to anyone just yet. I flounder a bit, but find a job after a few days. I still see Captain Mike cleaning off the Melissa every day, and I go to the docks. He's there scrubbing when I leave, and he's still scrubbing when I get back. There are new scrapes all over the hull, like something was scratching its way climbing up. Mike's become a pariah on the docks. No one wants to talk about it, and when they do it, as in low, hushed tones, eventually Captain Mike decides Melissa is finally clean, or he can't afford to go on without another day's bounty. He hires Carlos, the new guy on the docks, and hey, go out. I make a point of breaking the silence and talk to Mike to check in after they return at the end of the day. They've been catching much less than usual, like half if not worse. Still, he is getting back out on the water, and that's gotta be good for him. Carlos says he's been a little freaked out by the sharks that seem to tail them. I try to put him at rest. Tell him sharks aren't that big a deal. They're really just opportunistic bastards. I lie and make him feel a little better. Is that really a lie? One day the Melissa doesn't come back. I wait at the docks searching horizon. It gets dark. Mike doesn't usually stay out this late. I go to the bar and try to drink my body weight in vodka. Weeks later, another captain finds the Melissa floating a few miles out to sea. I wasn't there, so the rest is hearsay and rumor. The police report is still sealed. Apparently it was a bloodbath. Blood dried onto the decks. Most of it right under the nets, pieces of viscera scattered everywhere, at least the pieces the seagulls hadn't eaten. The pilot room saw some of the worst of it. Just guts spread everywhere, some tufts of hair and skin too, like someone was flayed by somebody who either didn't know what they were doing or was too enthusiastic to do it right. Mike used to sit there when we were out. Mike's revolver was found there too, for show. Tees fired, but no idea if anyone was hit. Who could even tell whose blood belonged to who? In the deck, they found a long piece of metal embedded deep in the wood. Looked like it was a piece of an old boat anchor. It had been crudely sharpened. The investigation wrapped up. Definitely foul play was the conclusion. Maritime law says that dead boats found at sea become the property of whoever finds them. Here's the thing. The captain who found it wanted absolutely no part of it, refused to even set foot on it. He had it sunk over by the reefs. He even took his own ship and put it in the dry docks for the season to scrape off the wood and have it sanitized and refinished. He was talking about selling it and moving up to different places. He said the waters aren't as hospitable as they used to be. Story 2. Biting at my heels, I enjoy running quite a bit. It might come off as a bit odd to say, but it really is important to me. I found my love for it back in high school when I ended up drifting aimlessly onto the cross-country track teams. Joining was less of an active choice on my part and more of a settling. My parents wanted me to be more like my football and academic all-star brother, and I just wanted them off my back. Running seemed like the easiest choice. It was less of a skill-based sport and more a test of endurance. Why, CH is something I thought I had plenty of, given all the hour-long lectures I've sat through. Of course, it wasn't easy like I thought it would be. Much like any sport, it required a lot of dedication and hard work, blood, sweat, and tears, and all that jazz. Given my general attitude towards life at the time, most would expect that to put me off. But surprisingly, it didn't. I loved it. It was less about the racing, competing, and all that, and more about the simple act of running, of just getting out there and moving your body. It was really hard at first, when you have to build up your stamina and become capable of running long distances. However, the feeling of your body improving, of becoming able to go farther for longer, is very satisfying. Plus, just having that ability to run miles and miles is incredibly freeing in a way. Something about being able to travel without relying on anything but yourself was a very positive factor in building up my self-worth. Having a more dependable body made me feel like a more reliable, complete person. By the time graduation came around, it was a part of my identity. If there was one part of it that I wasn't particularly fond of, it would be the occasionally nasty weather. In particular, timing a run outdoors during the summer can be a bit of a pain. When it comes to spring or fall, you can pretty much go out for a run whenever. For winter, it's less about timing and more about conditions. You can always bundle up a bit to keep the cold at bay. But whether or not surfaces will be icy or under thick layers of snow is definitely something to be concerned about. However, in no season are your windows for going out for a run more limited than during the summer months. If you live in an area where you have comparatively mild summers, this may not be the case for you, however. If you live in an area where the temperatures often go above 100 degrees Fahrenheit and death from heat stroke is a common occurrence, then you're probably able to relate. In weather like that, if you want to manage a run outside, you either need to go out in the early morning or late evening, or just find a decently shaded area and hope for the best. Sure, you could just go to an air-conditioned gym and run on a treadmill, but it just isn't quite the same, you know. Thankfully, when it came time for college, I ended up at one with a beautiful campus, with extensive jogging and bike paths, which were in a well-shaded, forested area. On top of that, my schedule ended up organized in such a way that I had plenty of time free in the mornings and evenings on most days. Overall, I was in pretty good shape to be able to run outside in any season, even in the hottest days of summer. If it weren't for what happened that one day, it would have been perfect. I was a bit late getting out of the dorm for my run that evening. I had to meet with my professor after class tea. Go over my plan for the final project, and the meeting ended up running a bit late. It was getting close to sunset by the time I got back from class and finished changing into my workout gear. but I decided to go out on a run anyway. Missing a day was a bit of a pet peeve of mine, and I figured that if I ran quickly enough, I'd be able to make it back before the sun set completely. I was right about that. I did manage to get back before the sun finished dipping below the horizon. However, there was one thing that I neglected to factor in, that in dense woods it would start to get a light dark long before the sun set completely. I was about halfway through the last leg of my 6-mile loop when it really started to set in. I could barely see my own feet hit the pavement, let alone the path ahead. It was then that I realized my mistake. However, I was well beyond being able to do much of anything about it. I was about 1.5 miles away from getting back to a relatively well-lit campus, but it wasn't like there was a way for me to cut the run short at that point. I was already on the quickest way back. The most I could do was run a bit faster. Sighing, I picked up my pace a bit, hoping that I could make it back to campus before I lost all traces of light. I wished then that I hadn't left all my devices at home and opted to enjoy the sounds of nature rather than music. At least then I could have had something to light my path. Unfortunately, I didn't quite make it. When I was still about 1/2 mile out, the forest had finally become pitch black, without even the light of the moon piercing through the thick canopy. I couldn't even see my own hand in front of my face. I didn't really mind it so much, though it did feel a bit unnerving, but running without sight was also a sort of fun, new experience, sort of like showering with the bathroom lights off. Sure, running in the dark was a lot riskier in comparison, but the maintenance staff did a good job of keeping the trails clear, so I was in little danger of tripping. Also, at that point, it was pretty much a straight shot to campus. I felt relatively safe. That is, until I wasn't. It came upon me as a sort of feeling, a general sense of something being amiss. I was more or less certain that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. All the same, though, I certainly wasn't having fun anymore. 0.4 miles left. I found myself shivering a bit, and not because of the cold. I found myself thinking back on the time I wet myself in a haunted house at 5 years old. The pure sense of fear that I felt back then in that moment seemed deeply similar to what was presently creeping up my spine as I ran through those woods. The rapid beating of my heart, Aurea, quickened by the exercise, pushed fearful adrenaline through my system ever quicker. I picked up the pace. 0.3 miles left. I almost couldn't hear the sound of the branch snappy over the pounding of my heart and rush of my breath. It came from somewhere off in the woods behind me and to my left. It was a perfectly normal sound to hear in the woods, completely innocuous, probably just a small animal in the underbrush. However, being as anxiety-ridden as I was in that moment, it may as well have been a gunshot. Reason was leaking rapidly from my mind. I felt certain the whatever had made that noise was coming for me. I was running full tilt now. 0.2 miles left. I heard a second set of footfalls, where once it was just the rhythmic smacking of my sneakers against the pavement. Suddenly there was an accompaniment. It seemed that whoever, or whatever, was behind me was trying to match my pace as best as they could, but it was ever so slightly offbeat. The sound seemed to be getting closer. I broke into a dead sprint. So did they, dropping any pretense of stealth. 0.1 miles left. I could see the exit where the last of the tray S parted, giving way to the well-manicured lawns of the campus grounds. It was so very close, a distance I could cover in less than a minute at a light jog. I couldn't take much comfort in the tea, though whatever was chasing me was right at my heels. They were so close that they might be able to reach out and touch me. With this proximity, I started to notice things, little details that seemed to only terrify me further. The scrape of claws against pavement with every step, a wet stench of rotting meat, a breath of hot air that coated my back in a vile humidity. I was just a few or strides away from escape, but those last steps might as well have been a marathon. I felt like a rabbit, desperately trying to outpace a set of ravenous jaws. It was so close. 3 steps. 2. 1. I broke free of the woods, losing my balance and tumbling off the path and into the grass as I went. Stunned, it took me a few moments before I scrambled to my feet, fearful of whatever had been chasing me following me into the light, but there was nothing there, nothing but the pitch-black entrance to the trails. The way the light hit the trees made it seem almost like a dark tunnel leading into the depths of a mountain or the great gaping maw of some massive beast, intimidating yet harmless. Whatever had been chasing me was gone. Perhaps it was never even there. I stumbled to my feet, out of breath yet full of relief. I chuckled a bit to myself and glanced about, thankful to find that no one was around to catch sight of my foolishness. Having fully convinced Miss Elf that I had simply imagined the whole thing, I headed off towards my dorm at a limping jog. It felt like I had pulled a calf muscle during my tumble. It wasn't until I got back to my dorm room and started stripping down for a shower that I saw them, a series of small, thin incisions in my right calf, arranged in the shape of a semicircle. They were about an inch deep and steadily oozy blood. It was almost as if I had been bitten by a small shark with a mouth full of razor blades. With that incident, in addition to the several disappearances that occurred out in those woods over the next few years, I was pretty much done with running on those trails. I stuck to using the treadmills at the school gym for the rest of my time at that college. Even during the daylight, it just felt safer that way. Story 3. They're not coming. They're already here. They're not coming. They're already here. That's all the email said. No subject, no name. And the email account was clearly a junk or throwaway account linked to AOL mail. At first, I laughed at the ridiculously serious message, not paying it much thought. I used to sign up for all sorts of stupid conspiracy, UFO, MAGA, zines, and online subscriptions when I was younger. I figure it was just spam mail trying to get people to go to their website or something like that. But then I remembered that there was no URL or link to anything, only those 6 ominous words. I remember thinking that if it was some sort of marketing gimmick, that whoever was running that department was doing a terrible job. Just as I finishing that thought, I heard my phone ding. It was another email from the same person. This time, all it said was, "Don't act any different or say anything. They will know." At this point, I began to feel a little creeped out. I still didn't know what the person was talking about, or if they even meant to send these cryptic messages to me All I knew was that I was scared. I replied back, "I think you have the wrong person. Please don't email me again." Foolishly, I thought that would resolve the issue. It didn't. About 5 minutes later, I received another email with my full name, date of birth, and apartment number. At first, I thought that perhaps this was a cruel prank some friends of mine were playing on me. But even they wouldn't take a joke this far. Finally, I decided that enough was enough. I wasn't going to let some random person get under my skin like this, so I blocked the sender's email address. Surely, I thought that would put a stop to all this nonsense, but once again I was wrong. I received another email from a different account. Same thing as before. No subject and no name, just another foreboding. NG message. Whatever you do, don't look outside. As soon as I read the last word, I heard a loud pop outside of my apartment just as my power went out. I thought the sound may have just been a generator or something, but then a blinding blue light began pulsating outside. As curious as I was about the source of the light and noise, I couldn't stop thinking about that last email. Whatever you do, don't look outside. Could this really be that great of a coincidence, or did the person sending me these emails know something that I didn't? Either way, I was too afraid to look outside. The pulsating lights began to scan up and down my apartment building. I instinctually ducked under my window, afraid that whatever the light was might reveal my location. Then the light just disappeared. At that moment the power came back on, so I stood up and slowly drew back my curtain. Nothing looked abnormal. The parking lot was as still and quiet as it is on most nights. I saw a man nonchalantly walking his dog as if nothing had just happened. I felt silly for getting so worked up and scared over nothing. Then my phone dinged again. This time all it said was, "I told you not to look outside." Now they know. At this point, I knew that someone had to be watching me. There was no other way to explain how they knew that I had disobeyed their previous message. I looked outside my window again and saw the same man with his dog, except they weren't walking anymore. They were standing still and looking straight up at my apartment, both with their mouths agape. I quickly closed my curtain and grabbed my phone. This was all too much for me. Without thinking, I dialed 911 and waited several minutes before an operator answered. 911, what is your emergency? I immediately began to try and explain every strange thing that had been going on for the last hour or so, from the emails and the strange blue light to the man and his dog. I suddenly realized that I sounded like a schizophrenic with all of my incoherent rambling. I had just begun to slow down and apologize to the operator when a piercing, high-pitched sound took over the call. The sound was so intense that I couldn't even leave the phone up to my ear. Just as I ended the call, another email popped up. "There's nitrogen monoxide hope in resisting now." It read, "Why, our just another one we've lost." I grabbed a duffel bag and began stuffing it with as many clothes and other items that it could hold. There was no way that I was going to stay holed up in my apartment for a second longer. I preferred to stay a few nights in a hotel or even in my car, if necessary, until I had something more concrete figured out. I swung my front door open to find dozens of people surrounding. The man and his dog, all of them staring right at me, mouths agape. I heard the same piercing noise as before, and it occurred to me that the sound was actually emitting from their open mouths. I started to make a run for my car when they all instantly threw their arms up, pointing at me, all slowly walking in my direction. There were too many of them, and my car was too far away. I sprinted back to my apartment and boarded up all of the doors and windows. It's been 3 days now. I still haven't left my apartment, and every time I try to call someone I'm bombarded with the same high-pitched tone. I'm at a loss for what to do at this point. Giving up and submitting to them is the last thing that I want to do, but it's starting to seem like the only option. I'm not sure how much longer I have before they break me, but there's still hope for you. Whatever you do, don't look outside. Story for the lake. Cryptozoology has always been a minor interest of mine. I say minor because it was something I'd only enjoy casually. A few internet articles here and there, scrolling through a couple of pages on a Tumblr blog dedicated to it. Maybe watching one of those Bigfoot documentaries, that kind of interest. Nothing serious, generally, that would be pretty common for most people. Most people, however, do not live in my little town where a supposed ripped is how many folks here make a living. I live in a small town in the UK, more specifically in the northwest of England. It's a tiny place not many people outside of the country have likely heard of, unless they've already been there for whatever reason or have an interest in cryptids. My small town is situated by one of the many lakes that dot this part of the country, and as so many bodies of water do, we have our own Loch Ness monster, so many people claim, anyway. I'm sure many of you are skeptical of that as you are of any such monster. Who can blame you? I grew up here and I didn't buy into that. I found it interesting, but I didn't believe it. Same as I didn't believe those people who claim aliens probed their backsides or that Bigfoot had destroyed their camp. It was something to read about and enjoy, but not something I believed. Most of my generation and that of my parents felt the same, but many of my grandparents' era clung to the belief in the monster. They stayed away from the lake unless they were in decently sized boats or one of the many ferries that traveled the length of the lake to nearby settlements. Not us kids and teens especially not in summer. Most of the time, British summers are nothing to brag about. They're pretty warm, but usually cloudy or wet. Sometimes, however, we were blessed with a heat wave. Nothing was better than a dip in the lake during the heat of the day. During the school holidays, the older kids would hang out by the lake well into the evening. The worst that ever happened was that someone would get a cramp whilst swimming and we'd have to get them back to shore, or someone would get their foot tangled in some lake weed and freak out until they realized what it actually was. Nothing sinister, nothing serious, most certainly no lake monster. One particular day during the Easter break, where it was much too cold to spend more than 5 minutes at a time in Tee Lake, I was spending my time climbing the many tall trees that covered the areas around the lakes. Maybe I was a bit old for tree climbing, most likely, but it had always been something I'd enjoy. Doing something about climbing as high as I could go and settling down on a sturdy branch, just looking over my surroundings, was something I enjoy. Most of the time I'd just watch boats going up and down the lake, people going about their business, cars passing down the country roads, just typical stuff not worthy of merit. But this day in spring was different. The day itself was like a chilly but sunny day in late March. I'd already taken up my temporary church in an old oak, where I stay for an hour or so before going off to meet friends. From where I was perched I could see two young kids, maybe around 8 or 9, playing down by the shore. They weren't close to the water, just sitting in the grassy area, little ways off the bank. Two girls. I couldn't really see what they were doing beyond that. General observation. This was nothing out of the ordinary. What was unusual was the large, dapple-gray horse trotting along the shoreline towards them. Horses weren't exactly an unusual sight themselves out in a rural town, but they were usually in their fields or accompanied by a rider. There was no one else in sight, and this horse had no saddle, bridle, or any other sort of riding gear. There are no true wild horses in the United Kingdom, and the only semi-wild horses make their home in the New Forest, somewhere right at the other side of the country that left the option of it having somehow gotten out of its field. For all it seemed weird to me, in hindsight, it wasn't all that unusual. Tourists were always crossing through private land and leaving gates open. Animals were bound to get out on occasion. The kids took immediate notice of the animal, looking up from their chatter and letting out delighted squeals I could hear even from my spot up in the tree. I watched as they ran up to it, fearless as all children were, oblivious to the fact that if they spooked it, one kick from its front or back legs could shatter their developing bones. I watched as the pair gleefully pet the animal. The horse itself didn't seem to mind the attention, which led me to think it was one Freck Etley used for riding. Most likely one of the horses rented out to tourists so they could enjoy a ride through the countryside. The horse lowered its head, allowing one of the kids to press a hand to its muzzle. I could hear their delighted laughter as the pair took turns alternating between stroking its flank and head. It was pretty cute, I have to admit. There's always something magical about an unfamiliar animal being content with your presence. With how calm this horse seemed to be, I didn't bat an eye as it lowered itself to the ground. The pair of kids seemed ecstatic about his climbing onto the animal's back. Not exactly safe or smart, but kids don't really think like that, and I'm sure the horse would have made it very clear it didn't want them bearing all over it if it wanted to. It was a pretty damn big horse. It took me a few moments to realize the children were no longer letting out happy squeals and giggles. They were screaming. I couldn't understand why at first, but as my vision focused more on the horse, I knew. How I hadn't noticed the change, I don't know. But where once it had been dapple-gray, it was now black, the kind of black that seems to absorb all light around it, distorting it. It seemed to be dripping wet. Even from my spot in the tree, I could see the tangled mess of its waterlogged mane and tail leaking water onto the ground. Its eyes were the worst of it. I shouldn't have been able to see them clearly from such a distance, but even in the dull spring sun, I could see the glowing from those sickening, milky eyes. It threw its head back, rising to its feet with the children still on its back. They were trying to get off, but they couldn't. I don't know how, and I'm sure they didn't know how either. But no matter how much they struggled and screamed, they couldn't get off of that horse. It was like they were superglued to it. I couldn't move from my spot, no matter how much my mind screamed at me to jump down and do something, anything. I'm ashamed to admit fear consumed me. Sweat dripped down my brow as my breathing grew more rapid by the second. My heart was beating so hard and fast that it hurt. I have no proper words to describe the primal terror that gripped me, the same terror I imagine gripped our ancestors when confronted by a giant sea of a bear or an angry mammoth. Though where their fight or flight instinct would kick in, mine didn't. I was simply frozen. Frozen as the beast charged towards the water, screaming children on its back, their cries not silenced until their heads dipped under the water that frothed and bubbled as they struggled beneath the surface. Then nothing, dust and eerie stillness on that SBR-ing morning. Not even the birds sang. I think they knew. Animals just know these things. I don't know how long I sat up in that tree just staring out over the water where that horse had vanished into the murk. I don't know what became of those kids, but I know they were never found and that they never will be. It was written off as accidental drowning. Their parents beat themselves up over it as any parent would. Nothing like this had ever happened before in our little community. Kids who grew up around the lake pretty much knew how to swim by the time they could walk, and they knew to be careful by the water. It didn't add up, of course, but beyond that, no one could explain it. I think the parents clung to the hope that their children simply ran away or were kidnapped so that they might one day find them again, and I can't blame them for that. I never told anyone what I saw. No one would have believed me anyway, save for a few ancient crones nobody took seriously, who frequently babbled about ghosts and ghouls. It haunts me that I did nothing, that I simply watched as those innocent children were pulled into a watery grave. I never went into the lake after that. To anyone that asked, I simply said that I didn't like the way the smell of the lake water clung to me. I didn't think I'd ever tell THI's story. But I still live in this town over a decade later, and last night I saw a dapple gray horse stalking along the lakeside. Story 5, Red Room. Henry had gone missing in Mexico weeks ago, and Lois kept getting these bizarre letters in the mail. She had assumed the first for envelopes she'd received in the first 4 days of the month afterward were to the wrong address or a mistake. However, the 5th envelope contained a blank sheet of paper with a word that would haunt her for weeks. Husband is what it said. Lois felt her blood run cold. The first fool our notes had read, "I will return and your respectively." The 6th one was ominous, only it read. After this, Lois got online to search how to contact the Mexican authorities, running into little luck. Her conversations with police and her representatives went the same, and all led to dead ends. After the message reached, if you can correctly guess, Lois was beginning to lose it. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. I will return your husband only if you can correctly guess what I will do to him, was the terse message that was spelled out with newspaper clippings. The nature of the words "ng" on separate sheets of paper seemed unnecessary if this was the message the entire time. On the back of the final sheet of paper, reading him, was a web address reading http://www.analogbrowser.com. And that was all she had to go on. The website was unimpressive, nothing more than a series of images and logos, with a small link in the center. When she clicked on it, the analog browser began to download onto her laptop, along with a Word document. In the document was a web address, with a notable difference in the domain registry. The address was simple, u.analog. After the program was finished downloading and running, the browser, reminiscent of Opera, emerged on her screen, and Lois entered the address into the search bar. A red chat room appeared on her screen before Lois could even begin writing a message. A series of bobbing dots appeared in the text field, preceded by the words, "Username is typing." She froze, her eyes locked on the small red box. The dots continued to hop up and down. The text, "Username is typing," remained. Seconds went by, minutes. The world outside the glowing white square with the red box inside of it became discolored and grainy as Lois stared holes into her laptop, as if trying to lure her husband's kidnapper into action. And still the bobbing continued. The dots had all but replaced her very thoughts when a series of characters popped into existence. Lois wrenched her chair across the floor and dove face first into the laptop, guzzling the words on the screen, which read, "I will return your husband only if you can correctly guess what I will do to him." Lois's laughed. I twitched involuntarily. The text, "Username is typing," entered to the screen. The text that replaced it seconds later read, "And I cannot lie whether you guess correctly or not." She was about to answer, but hesitated. What if he would not return? Henry, as Lois went to enter this inquiry, she hesitated again. Then that would mean he was lying about. The reality of the situation began to dawn on her. Lois didn't understand why this was happening, she thought. If he is both simultaneously lying and telling the truth, then there has to be a third option. The third option couldn't be that Henry was the man writing the notes and had faked his own kidnapping. His car was out front, and when she dropped him off at the airport, he said he'd call her when he landed, and he didn't. Furthermore, if this person, had it been possible he were Henry, were simultaneously lying and telling the truth, then he couldn't be Henry to begin with. That left her with an oddly terrifying answer. She wasn't really her. Henry wasn't really there, and this situation was the result of a repressed memory. Lois went back over the events in her head, leaving the house with Henry, driving to the airport, dropping him off, getting the call about the laptop being on and not to look at it, seeing the red room on the browser, the argument, his second call, and then her waiting on the third call that never came. It was all bizarre, to be sure, but one thing that stood out to her upon analyzing the day's events was the red room. She recalled multiple times stopping to get a timestamp, but each time pulled further and deeper into the horrific website. That's when it hit her. She couldn't remember what day it was. She didn't even know what time of day it was. Not even day or night. She'd imagine going back home. She'd imagined it was his business trip, not hers. She'd imagined it was his laptop, not hers. She'd imagined she was home, but she was not. She'd imagined it all to distract her, to distract from the pain. She didn't get a good look at the room before she died, but she knew one thing. It was red. Story 6. My boyfriend's dreams are starting to scare me. My name is Holly, and I've been with my boyfriend, Dan, for 5 years. Lived with him for 3. I love Dan more than anything in this world. He's my best friend, my partner in crime, my biggest pest, and my #1 supporter. I honestly couldn't imagine my life without him anymore. We both work in the food service industry. He's a chef, and I'm a server. Food is his biggest passion, and while being a line cook doesn't pay much, it's worth it to see him do something he loves. Working in food service means we work some pretty weird hours. It's not uncommon for us to get off of work after midnight, come home, quickly scarf down our dinner, then head up to bed and sleep until around 11 a.m. or 12 p.m. Dan has a much easier time falling asleep than I do. Most nights, as soon as his head touches the pillow, he's out like a light. I, on the other hand, struggle a bit more to settle my mind and get comfortable. This usually leads to me plugging in my headphones to watch YouTube or scroll through Reddit until I fall asleep while trying not to move or make too much noise that would wake him up, though he's a pretty heavy sleeper, so I never have to worry about it much. Dan has always been a very animated dreamer. He talks in his sleep every single night. Sometimes he even sings or raps. When we first started sleeping together, he would speak so clearly I honestly thought he was still awake. Sometimes I like to talk to him while he's asleep and tell him about the little nocturnal conversations in the morning. He also has a tendency to sleepwalk on occasion, which can be a bit worrisome. Dan sleeps naked, and I can't very well just let him walk out of our apartment in his birthday suit in the middle of the night. Recently, though, his dreams have been getting kind of odd, and when I say recently, I mean within the past year. It started with what seemed to be a few bad dreams. I always keep one earphone out, just in case he says something or if he gets out of bed and I need to hear. One night, Dan began tossing and turning and whimpering, literally whimpering like a scared puppy. Suddenly he rolled over to me, his eyes open wide. His expression was terrified and frantic. "Holly," he called out with a trembling voice. The fact that he didn't see me, even though his eyes were open, was enough for me to realize he was still asleep. Hey, it's okay." I cooed quietly and gently cupped his face in my hands. "I'm right here. Everything's all right." Dan let out a sigh before snuggling against me and pulling my body tight against his. For the rest of the night, any time I moved, his eyes would shoot open again with the same frantic expression, and I would have to calm him down and let him know I wasn't going anywhere. I asked him about it the next morning, and he said he didn't remember a thing, though he said he had a really weird dream, but he couldn't remember what about. This went on for about 3 days. The next night after that were calm, and I figured he'd just had a few bad dreams due to some stress from work. About a week after give or take a few days, something even weirder happened. We were laying in bed like normal when suddenly Dan just got up and walked over to our bedroom window. I pulled my earphone out and called to "Hi, Dan, what are you doing, baby?" At first, he didn't answer, so I called to him again. He then placed his finger on the glass as if he was pointing to something outside. "Hair coming," he muttered, ... "Who's coming?" I was starting to get a bit worried, so I made my way over to the window to see what he was talking about. We live in a second-story studio apartment on the side of a fairly busy road. It's not uncommon to see people walking or driving by even late at night. But that wouldn't explain what he was talking about. They want inside. Then suddenly W wrapped his arms around my waist in an almost possessive or protective manner. We can't let them in. I won't let them in. I won't let them hurt you, though I was a little freaked, and I simply smiled and led Dan back to bed every night for a month after that. Dan would get out of bed and either walk to stand in front of our door or in front of our window. He would mutter something about not letting them in or then getting closer before I would pull him back to bed every morning. I would ask him about it, and he'd tell me he had no clue what I was talking about. Nothing else seemed strange about him, though during the day he wasn't any more fatigued than usual. He didn't seem paranoid or scared. Everything was fine until he'd go to bed. One night he jolted out of bed suddenly and for the door. I was worried he might run out, so I jumped out of bed to stop him. "They're here," he yelled in a panic. Before I could even ask Dan what was going on, he went on the defy. He started screaming at the door, telling them to leave. They weren't allowed to come to him. They weren't welcome. With every passing minute, he seemed to become more and more agitated. "You can't have him," he yelled before punching a hole into the wall next to the door. "Daniel Thomas." Screaming his name like that seemed to startle him awake enough. "Huh? What?" He looked around, confused, and then whined about his hand hurting. I led him to the bathroom, patched up a little gash across his knuckle, then led him back to bed. He was out like a light again as soon as his knees touched the bed. While he didn't talk the rest of the night, he still tossed and turned quite a bit. I was becoming steadily more concerned, as this didn't just seem to be a reoccurring night. Whatever was happening was very real to him at least. I tried asking him to see a doctor or a therapist, but he said there was no purpose in wasting the money, and he felt fine. I thought maybe I was just jumping to conclusions. Maybe I was just being paranoid, until a few nights ago when Dan suddenly sat up in bed. I was prepared to bring him back to bed from the door, but he didn't. To get out, he just stared into the darkest corner of our room, which is next to our dresser. "Dan, they're here," he whispered without moving. They got in. His eyes were wide open and focused in on that one corner. "Dan, you're freaking me out." Suddenly that attention was turned to me. "They aren't of this world, but they're trapped. They're angry. They feast in the dark, but want to devour your light. Don't let them take your light, Holly. Don't let them. I won't let them hurt you." I could feel my heart sink to the pit of my stomach. His voice was so serious, and his eyes bore into mine. He pulled me close to him and pressed my head against his chest. I could hear his heart beating under my ear and tried to use that to forget about what he'd just said. Lately, though I've been becoming more fearful, I've started seeing shadows move in the dark parts of our apartment. Our electric bill has shot through the roof from me trying to keep the lights on at all times. I haven't been able to sleep right because I keep having these nightmares that make me wake up screaming in a cold sweat, but I can never remember what they're about. I don't know what is happening, but my boyfriend's dreams are starting to scare me. Story 7. Driving down the road far from home. On my way back from work, I'm surrounded by pastures and rural country houses. 8 in the night, dark but backlit by a pale moon. I drive fast, but not too fast. I'm tired. The day's work has pushed me over the edge, and all I want to do is sleep. I count the houses and horses to keep myself awake. In the near distance, I see shadows which could be easily mistaken for figures. I'm tired, so chalk this up to another trick of the eyes on a weary mind. I look to the houses scattered over the fields, cast like brush ceded to the wind. The irregular distancing sets a stark contrast to the order and grid-like fashion of cities, setting up an almost alien landscape to anyone but a local. The darkness comes and goes as the moon shines brightly over field and road. The light feels to be blinking as if struggling to preserve some memory of daylight. Turning back to the road, I feel I glimpse a lone figure in a pasture close to the road. It's strange what with wild animals, for any soul to be out and about at this time of night. I turn to try and catch a glimpse of the figure, but the clouds cover any chance of recognition, and by the time the light is high again, I'm too far down the road to tell. No matter, the road is long, and I tease none of my business what some local yokel does on a Thursday night. The light rises and falls, almost feeling rhythmic and as metering, clouds speckled in a dark and gray sky. Not a light in any house, no lights on the road, only my headlights to keep me company. There are no other cars on this two-lane road, but should there be, 11 looms close, and the city is far away. Suddenly I see a figure in the near distance as the light rises, too dark to make out features. It looks like they're looking out into the distance, and at the fence and a pasture off to the right-hand side of the road. As I get closer, the light dims again, but not too dark as to make all the details disappear. I can see this figure has on a jacket and jeans of some kind, strange for Samian. He to be wearing a jacket this far south during the summer, be it night time or not. I lean to the passenger's side to try and make out more of this figure, but it's almost as if the moon doesn't want me to, and the world descends into a deep darkness again. I pass where the figure should be and look into my rear-view mirror for a long while after, hoping to catch some image of the man in the distance, but the moon seems to hide from me. I give up and return my full attention to the road in time to glance another figure standing just outside the ditch at the edge of my headlights. What the F, I say, before regaining my composure. The figure is gone to the distance long before I can catch any detail. My heart starts to pound, looking for any logical reason for so many people to be outside, standing along the road, out in the countryside. Cults, scarecrows, and other possibilities flutter through my mind before leaving me in a sour disposition. Nothing feels right. The moon seems to attempt to return just as I notice another figure further down the road, in the middle of the ditch. He seems to be looking off down the road away from me, but I catch a glimpse of what appears to be a long nose and pale skin, not a shock in itself, but terrifying due to the black jacket and jeans the figure wears. Just as I close on the figure, the moon dives away, leaving me in a blackness that seems to suffocate and drive home my isolation and defenselessness out here in the sticks. Turn around or keep going, the question reverberates in my head for the bet. A part of 15 minutes. Turn around and go back. Find another way home. Do I plow onwards and hope I've reached the end of this line of figures steadily approaching me? One figure at a time I decide to take a chance, If I see one more figure, I will turn this car around and haul us back to the interstate and find a new way to my own home. We're within half an hour of my home. East City at this point, to turn around unless something terrible happens. I've not been shot at, and see no way someone could easily harm me in my car. The moon is refusing to return. I look around at the pitch black around me, realizing the only light I see is the dash and my headlights. The darkness suffocates and seems to push in on me from all sides. I lean forward to cling to the only leg HD I have on my travels and notice something peculiar. The lights that sheltered me and pushed out all the way to the fences and tree lines I whizzed past outside the ditches along the row were Nolan. Gare in my vision, I could barely see the depths of the ditch to the sides of me, no more than 5 feet to either side. What was worse, I barely had a car's length of visibility in front of me. No fog was in my way. All that I could see was darkness. It felt like driving through space, the void spewing forth a road beneath me and consuming everything behind me. I turned around and realized that even with the dash, I couldn't see my back seat. All that was behind me was pitch black. This panicked me more than anything else. I turned back to the road and nearly wrecked my car. There he was, standing at the edge of the road, facing just ahead of me. A pale, sickly cheek hung below a deep tunnel like eye socket. Time seemed to slow as I zoomed past, turning to keep this figure in my sight. The figure reached the edge of my light, lining us up eye to eye for a split second, and I could swear this gaunt, sickly man smiled at me, a somber, happy smile, filled with the strangest kind of care and ease. If I had gotten this look from anyone in a different situation, I would have been disarmed by its nature. Even from such sickly-looking a man, all it did for me now was send a chill and panic through me, the likes of which I've never known. Gone into the abyss, I made up my mind. I turned fully back to the road, drove for some seconds, and turned my car around, almost swinging the back end of my vehicle off the other side. Either I passed through this nightmare the way I came, or I ran the figure over. I drove like a madman, passing 100 miles per hour, pushing towards 120. No man appeared in my vision. Instead of the ghastly vision I saw, a small figure wearing a yellow rain jacket stepped out in front of my car. I swerved on ends, terrified of hitting someone's child, before realizing there was another figure in the oncoming lane. The man was facing me, the extent of his thin, gaunt, skeleton-like face being apparent. His exposed body was thin, his hair framing his head in an Einstein-esque way. His clothing was old and worn through in place. I swerved back, completing the fastest serpente any maneuver I'd ever pull off in my life, and continuing to haul tail down the road. My pulse was pounding. I was dizzy and out of breath as I felt a hand close around my shoulder. From behind, I stand in a snow-covered field, facing out towards the distance. Pitch black surrounds me, and the cold seems to burn into my skin. I see houses scattered like bushes seeded by tea. He whined. The moon passes behind clouds, and I cannot move. I'm stuck still. Panic grips me, and I cannot move. I cannot breathe. I begin suffocating, but do not pass out. I drown in my inability to move or hear. In the distance behind me, I hear the sound of a car engine rumble.